Hey there, you're listening to the EmpowerTech Podcast with Iyari Cevallos. This podcast is where we discuss all things tech and explore the growing ways in how we can leverage technology to lead smart, sustainable, and impactful lives.
Mandy is a cybercrime specialist with experience in cybersecurity, investigations, and intelligence. Honoured with multiple information security industry awards, she has also been named a top 10 influencer by the International Fire and Security Exhibition and Conference for the global security industry. She's an author, adjunct lecturer, and a domestic and international speaker. In this podcast, we get a glimpse into the world of criminals and how they have become sophisticated in their use of tech. We talk about real-world examples of what is happening today and what's important for us to know to protect ourselves. Mandy, it's so exciting to have you here today.
Thank you.
Look, there's so much we could talk about on this topic. Where should we begin with how criminals use technology today?
Well, it is really a huge subject because criminals are using technology for a variety of crimes. And it's not just criminals, it's nation-state threats as well. Because if you think of nation-state threats, they might not actually be criminals per se, because they could be working for their nation's governments. So it's not necessarily the same as how you would refer to criminal, but they are misusing technology to hurt their foes as well. And one of the big things that really concerns me at the moment is the advances in artificial intelligence, how people use it in their everyday lives, how they're using it at work, but how criminals are also abusing it to hurt people. And that's something that is really concerning me.
Yeah, wow, I can just imagine. We'll dive into that in a moment in a bit more detail. Now, I do hear some words bandied around, and so just want to clarify with you around, is criminals using technology the same as cybercrime?
Well, there's no global definition of cybercrime, but in Australia, it definitely is, because cybercrime refers to crime directed at computing technology. That's where you're looking at your denial of service attacks or your ransomware, but also crime where technology is integral to that offence, so enabling it. And that could be cyber-enabled fraud, or it could be things such as facilitating or producing child exploitation material. So cybercrime in Australia is an umbrella term for any cyber-enabled fraud, cyber-enabled crime, whether it's against technology or against the humans.
Okay, yeah, that's quite a broad term in terms of the way that we use it here in Australia. So really great to get that clarification. Mandy, I'm really interested in some of the history around this type of crime. Can you walk us through, how criminals have, leveraged internet and technology to, do acts that that we may or may not be aware of in the past? It would be great to get some of that history from you.
Well, it's definitely not new, and criminals have used technology even before computers to commit crime. If you think I think it was the 1920s when a guy defrauded the public by selling the Eiffel Tower twice. And he used technology to do that because he had stolen some council crests and logos and had those printed to pretend that he was actually speaking on behalf of the Parisian government. And so he used technology then to hurt people, to trick people. So technology enabled fraud, enabled crime. It predates computing. Computers just make it easier because you don't have geo blocks. You can commit a crime in Paris, but you're actually hurting someone in New Zealand, because the internet has made it possible to not have to be within your literal jurisdiction, but you could hurt any country. So the impact of the internet has made it easier to commit these crimes, but technology has been used for crimes for a long time. If you think about the Jacquard loom, when the Jacquard loom was created during the Industrial Revolution, people were doing things to those looms, physically impact them, in a way to stop these factories using Jacquard looms. And if you think about it in a 21st century perspective, that is similar how critical infrastructure is hit to prevent things happening. It's just that the way technology has advanced has made it easier for people to disrupt it or to use it for crime. When you think of the 90s, when we started doing computers with internet connections, where the World Wide Web is new and people used AOL, for example, when they had chats. That's when you first saw things that weren't called phishing then, but they were phishing, where people were tricking people into divulging their password. It is not a new thing, and abusing technology for crime is not a new thing. It's just with the advances of technology now, it's making it easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can start to see how things might be easier, especially when you're describing, somebody sitting in Paris attacking someone or trying to defraud someone in Australia. It'd be quite difficult to trace that. And even if you could, what could the police actually do? And if it's not a significant crime, how would they be prosecuted or stopped? That whole concept of, if you're not actually a local, what recourse have you got for those consequences to be handed down to the person that's committing that crime? So, that's a really good way of illustrating kind of the ease in a way that I hadn't really thought about before, Mandy. So thank you. I'm just wondering, on the infrastructure attacks, can you give us some examples of what you mean by that for those that don't work in technology?
So if you'll think the Russian-Ukraine conflict, for example, because that's something in all our heads. Before Russia launched the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, they actually took out their satellites that enabled their internet and they enabled their communication. That is critical infrastructure that has been taken out to enable this warfare. It basically left them blind because all their communication was gone. So in this day and age, you can hit critical infrastructure using computers, but you don't actually physically have to be there. If you think of things in conflicts in the past, where the ancient Romans that would hit water supplies, for example, physically doing damage to them, they have to physically be there to hit the critical infrastructure. Whereas in these days, you don't have to physically be there. You can trick someone to click a link to get their access to that critical infrastructure. It doesn't matter where you are, but you could still hurt that critical infrastructure.
Yeah, so then the risk-taking can be, I guess, higher whilst not putting themselves in danger, right? In that scenario that you've just painted, I can see now what sort of infrastructure you're referring to. So I'm assuming that might also mean today that infrastructure might also be referring to a country's water supply.
Yes, well, critical infrastructure is anything that maintains your civilians. So it could be your water supply, it could be your satellites, it could be your electricity. It's anything that's critical.
Yes, because it all runs on technology now.
Right.
That's
and
the other thing.
If that's that a person has to physically come and tamper with it, it can be disrupted without anyone actually being in the same country.
Yeah, wow. Okay. So in terms of the concern that you have right now that you mentioned earlier around generative AI or AI, because I know that we talk about these terms, we bandy these terms around. How are criminals using this new, I guess, emerging technology to commit crime?
Well, AI is an umbrella term, so let's talk about Gen AI, because AI could be machine learning, for example, and it's not necessarily the same as AI. Generative AI is not exactly extremely new, it's just that it has become mainstream now. And criminals have far more resources than we do. So they can start exploring new technology and using new technology in a way that we may not have thought of, or may not be able to safeguard, or they could actually create their own technology. They have enough resources to do that, leveraging the resources that have already been created. So at the moment, we're seeing a lot of nasties like deepfake, where an image is being manipulated to appear as if it's somebody else. But worse than that, in the early months of 2024, in the first quarter of 2024, there were at least 2 public domain examples of deepfake masking on live videos. And that actually allowed people to commit business email compromise, fraud, getting someone to pay an invoice that was faked.
Okay. Mandy, can you just break that down for me? So are you saying that somebody had replicated a legitimate website? Is that what you mean by that?
No, not a website, a literal video conference. So the examples are: an employee of a company is asked to pay an invoice by a CEO or a CFO who's saying this invoice needs to be paid.
Okay.
In this case, these employees got, one was a WhatsApp message and one was an email saying, we need these invoices paid, and to legitimacy, please get onto a Zoom call with me. So these employees got onto a video conference call, and the people they saw on that screen were literally colleagues that they could recognize and board members that they could recognize in live video.
Wow.
Those live video were using deepfake mask. The deepfake mask made it appear, both in audio and visual, that they were the people they pretended to be. So this impersonation is very, very sophisticated. And so these two examples in two separate companies, people were defrauded because they actually believed that it was their CFO or their CEO telling them to pay this. They used video conferencing to prove that veracity, and they looked like them and sounded like them. So who's going to say they're not them? And they were tricked that way. It was a type of deep fake masking.
Okay. That sounds very scary. I'm just wondering how those employees would have felt afterwards. Like, at what point did they pick up that this was in fact what you've described and not real?
I believe it was probably a week or so after. Not all of the information is public domain, and of course we need poor victims, but it would have been nasty for them because they did the right thing. They wanted to prove that this request was correct. So they asked to verify in another way.
Yes.
And so they're not going to just do it by a text message or an email. Let's verify by literally seeing you. So we get a video conference call. Oh, it must be you. So they're doing the right things. They're following the processes of verifying before paying. So they were so severely tricked. They were completely victims of it. It's heart-wrenching for these people and for these companies that this kind of thing occurs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is very sophisticated. And you talked about earlier around, these types of criminals have resources. What do you mean by that? Do you mean like money and time? Is that the sort of thing you mean by resources?
Money, time, personnel. A lot of these criminal organizations, whether they're selling cybercrime as a service or they're doing cybercrime themselves, or they're using cybercrime to provide finances for their country or provide finances for other criminal enterprises, they have complete business structures where they have coders and psychologists and accountants and marketers. They have a massive amount of literal people resources as well as money resources and technology resources. They have far more than the people fighting this stuff. So it is very, very difficult when you're working in policing or intelligence or cybersecurity because you're constrained by budgets, you're constrained by how many people you can actually hire or technology you can actually use. But they don't have those constraints. And a lot of those large criminal enterprises that sell cybercrime as a service, that is literally their bread and butter. So they put a lot of resources behind it, and they have a lot of people, a lot of skills, a lot of technology, a lot of money.
Yeah, that does sound extremely organised. I'm assuming that there are particular countries where these sorts of business structure crime exist. I can imagine that some countries that are poorer potentially have more of this occurring.
Yes, it is. It is difficult because some of these cybercrime as a business enterprises are actually in basically any country. If you look at public domain information about arrests, you'll see arrests made in Australia as well, of people doing this who are working for these companies, because again, the internet makes it easier to work from anywhere. So they can work from anywhere too.
They're working from home. Oh, brings a new meaning to that phrase. This is really interesting from my perspective in terms of how this has become quite sophisticated. I also hear that, for organisations here in Australia, that the budgets that they get may not match, the type of investment that these types of structures have access to. Does that then mean that it's only a matter of time in terms of, medium to large organisations being infiltrated?
How do you mean by infiltrated? Because infiltrated to me would be insider threat, but I don't think that's what you're talking about.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. And this is where sort of language is really important, Mandy. So thank you for clarifying.
Do you mean the company being compromised?
Yes.
Well, companies are already being compromised in Australia, in the UK, in USA, everywhere. They're already being compromised. There's so many data breaches and data thefts and credential phishing, and these aren't all in the old way of doing things. A lot of these are enabled by generative AI. When you think of how people are tricked these days, sometimes the emails are very, very sophisticated, and it's very, very difficult to tell whether they're legitimate or not, even when you analyze them. And they have been created using the criminals' version of, say, ChatGPT, where they've gone, write me an email that looks like this, how this person would speak, or write me an email that appears to be a Microsoft login, for example. And they're crafting these really, really well and using the power of generative AI to create these things. And they're making it very, very difficult to work out if it's legitimate or not.
Yeah, for people to work it out. So, current training for staff is typically, does this sound like someone? Is the grammar correct? Is there spelling mistakes? And if criminals are getting better at having these things written en masse, I imagine, quicker, faster, more sophisticated, then it will be more difficult. So that makes me start to think, what might this look like in the future? How can people prepare?
And that's a good question. I actually ranted on LinkedIn this week about traditional training methods are no longer sufficient. We have to create a security culture, but a culture of critical thinking, because it's not don't click that link or check the URL as legitimate first. If you're thinking of how criminals abuse legitimate services like DocuSign, for example, then that link is genuine. It literally is DocuSign. Or if a criminal is using a hijacking of your search results, then the URL is genuine. It's just that your search result has been hijacked and a different number or a different contact details has been overlaid on the legitimate website. So critical thinking is essential. You can't just go check the URL. Well, the URL is correct. Now what? Or check the email address. It is correct because that person has been compromised. That vendor has been compromised, so the email address is correct. Or check the grammar and the spelling. Well, it's exactly how that person will speak to me, and that's because generative AI has created this by teaching it from looking at how that person has written in social media, for example, and news releases, taken all that data, taught how this is how that person speaks. So now that email looks legitimate. It makes it very, very difficult. So we have to start teaching critical thinking to people to go, now what? You've got this email that wants you to do something, to click a link, to provide your details, to pay a bill. What do you do? What processes do you put in place to verify this is correct? How do you know that the person you've contacted to verify it is actually the person you think it is? Critical thinking is a must. Start questioning things, question what you know, and put in place things beforehand. If you work in a business where you're dealing with finances, people that would ask for things to be paid within your organization, and set up your own ways to verify. For example, do you know their normal text, their normal number that they text from? What app do they use to text from? Have certain things to say, was that you? Is that you? Can you tell me it's you? But don't rely on that alone. A critical thinking again, because someone could, of course, have that number. So you have to be really, really careful, because a criminal could have that phone number, take over that app. You have to think, what are the multiple ways that I can verify this prior to paying? What are the multiple ways I can verify this prior to giving my credentials? Critical thinking, we need to teach people. It's the culture of security and the culture of privacy that empowers people. Instead of giving them a tick box of don't click that link and don't do this and don't do that, teach them what you can do, because empowerment is about what you can do, not keep telling people not to do something.
Yes. And in terms of what you see coming down the pipe that maybe people aren't aware of, is there anything else that, is surprising you or you're seeing through this generative AI use that we haven't already talked about?
None of it surprised me, to be honest. None of it. I was speaking at a conference, and I think it might have been about 4 years ago. And someone asked me what I thought would happen with AI, and I told them what I thought would happen, and it literally has happened. It's not surprising. Criminals abuse technology. Criminals abuse world events. None of this is surprising at all. What surprises me, however, is the way that the media has not caught up with how they articulate information. They're still trying to scare people. Maybe that sells advertising space still. I don't know, but I believe it is the way that information should be shared. When we're talking about empowering people and giving them ways to critically think, screaming headlines about data breaches without finally nuancing what that actually meant or what you could do about it, I feel is a little irresponsible. But I do understand a journalist has to sell advertising space or has to get the clicks on the website. What surprises me, though, in the 21st century is that that kind of thing is still allowed, where, you know, reputable organizations have screaming headlines about data breaches and ransomware without finally nuancing it, without explaining it. Or if they do explain it, it's in the last paragraph when no one's bothered to read. And I think they should lead with finely nuanced information to explain it. Don't scream headlines that could be misinterpreted, and give people the power to help themselves, and do that up front. Yes, we know there's data breaches, or we know there's data exfiltration. What can you do to help yourself?
Well, on that topic, you know, we usually wrap up with some tips for people to empower themselves. What are your top tips, Mandy, for our listeners to empower themselves in this space?
Well, keeping on the Gen topic, I think that because everyone's going to be using it, let's face it, it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. No one can stop people using it. And it's a cool tool. These are cool things. You can use it. It's a tool.
Yes.
People need to remember all these things are tools. Think critically again how you're using it. Think about your data security and data privacy. Look at the terms and conditions. People rarely bother reading them, but in this case, I would really like people to read the terms and conditions before they use this technology, because you don't know where your information is going. So carefully read, where is my information going? If I put a prompt, this GPT engine, where does my prompt go? Are you using my information to train your model? Is my information going offshore? Is my information going to a country that perhaps I'd rather it didn't go? How is my information being used? Think about how anything you upload into these, whether it's your personal photo because you want to make a cool photo, cartoon montage or something, what's happening to my photo? Does this model forget the photo, or is that model saving my photo to train itself, or keeping that photo somewhere that someone could take it? Really think about data security and privacy. Don't rely on the output without doing checks yourself. I was actually talking to a colleague this morning about this very thing. And one analogy I used is when I use a sewing machine, the sewing machine's a really cool tool, and I've got a very advanced one, but I still don't trust it completely. Sew a seam, then once I've sewn it, I take it and have a look if the seam is actually sewn properly. I've used critical thinking. I'm checking. I'm not doing 100% trust in my tool. When you use Gen AI, don't have 100% trust in that tool. Check yourself and think about it, because sometimes they're not correct. Sometimes with absolute rubbish. Sometimes they can't even do maths. So think about, does this make sense? But use it as a tool and know it's only a tool. It is not going to know absolutely everything. And then other ways that I believe empowering people has been really careful what you put on social media and checking your privacy settings. Who can see what you have put on there? What are you, when you put a photo up, what metadata are you sharing about where you actually are? When you put a photo up, is it showing children? Is it showing schools? Is it showing car registrations? Is it showing your house address? Or is there a way that a person could identify where you live by your photo? Think about things like that. I'm not saying don't use social media and don't share, but have a real think about it. And when you share, do so consciously, knowing that it's not only the good people seeing this, it's going to be people that wish you or your organization harm who could be seeing this as well. And think about how the data could be scraped.
And when you're saying those things, Mandy, I'm also thinking about what you might be talking to if you're a parent to your teenagers that are prolifically using social media. And I assume that conversation, can be a little bit tricky because our teenagers don't necessarily understand those bigger consequences, but also having those conversations with them, right, in terms of, are you taking a photo with your school uniform on, and can you see which high school you're going to because there's a little badge on you somewhere, and things like that as well. So those are the things that I think of as well when you describe those things.
Exactly right. And don't just talk to teenagers, talk to children from young age. Like, you teach stranger danger, or look both ways before you cross the street, or wash your hands before you eat. All those things, good internet hygiene and use of technology should be part of that. When I think of teenagers, I'm thinking, is it too late to talk to them when really we should be starting that dialogue from a very young age?
Earlier, yeah.
And with teenagers, maybe sometimes it's about, do you want to hurt your mate? Because your friend, your best friend, your pals, your teammates, if you put this up here, how are you hurting them? Because they might not think in terms of themselves. The team might go, look, I don't care. It's my stuff. I don't care. But what about your best friend? Will they care? And the eSafety Commissioner in Australia has a lot of resources about how parents can speak to children and help children, and also resources for children themselves about this kind of thing. And I always say use the eSafety Commissioner site because it's absolutely brilliant. It has a lot of information there.
Okay. Oh, that's great. We might put that in the show notes. And Mandy, I do have another question that as you were speaking, I should ask. So we have, I guess, things like two-factor authentication and password managers now. Would you recommend that people get familiar with those things and use them alongside their critical thinking?
They should definitely be using multi-factor authentication, because if a criminal has their password and their credit, they'll have to get their multi-factor authentication to get in. Yes, people should be using those things, and password managers or passwordless states. I believe Microsoft is introducing a lot of passwordless ways of credentialing in because these make things safer. However, know that they're not a silver bullet and a critical thing to play, because just because you have multi-factor authentication does not mean you are totally safe. There are ways to bypass it or ways to trick people. So use them again as a tool, but don't think I'm now completely safe because I'm using it. But what we need to do is arm ourselves as possible and make it harder and harder for the criminals. If we make it harder, then they're going to go, you're too hard, I'll go to the low-hanging fruit and choose somebody else.
Perfect. Well, not perfect for the low-hanging fruit, but at least from a mindset perspective, I think that's a great piece of advice, Mandy, so thank you. Look, it's been lovely having you on the show today. I think I probably could ask you more questions, but I think we've landed on a nice place there in terms of arming people with some good advice and things that they can start to do or think about to empower themselves in this space. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks for listening today. Do keep in mind that this is a podcast for informational purposes, and all we're really doing is sharing our opinions on things that matter to us. With that being said, if you liked what you heard and want to continue supporting us, share this podcast with your network to help us grow and bring on even more guests. Until next time, this is Iyari from EmpowerTech, signing off.